Alright, people, midweek report time. So, a lot of stuff has come out. Actually, to be honest with you, realistically, a lot of stuff has come out over the last kind of 24 hours or so with regards to boxing news, fights announced, the sanction bodies making announcements and stuff like that. That's one of the reasons why I'm kind of doing these more on a Thursday. Because I find that between Wednesday and Thursday is normally when you get a lot of the big news, or at least some news starts coming out. So, hence the reason I've been doing this a lot on Thursday. So, we'll start with this. So, the WBO have now ruled that Charlo, who we obviously know is fighting Canelo Alvarez September 30th, yours truly's birthday as well, so a nice birthday present, that's going to be a good fight, that fight will, basically Charlo's going to get stripped immediately after they announce him in the ring. So WBO's rationale is they want him to be announced as undisputed at 154 pounds, and then he'll be stripped. And then obviously Tim Tszyu, being the interim champion, will be elevated to full champion. I always wonder when a fighter gets elevated to full. It must not look. It obviously must be nice that you can say I'm world champion, but it mustn't be nice in one regard because you're kind of like, well, like I don't get that moment. You know the way some fighters say, you know, that moment when I won my first title, and you hear it in other sports, more individual sports, you know, when I won that first championship, or I won this first, it must be a great feeling for a fighter. And for Tim Tszyu, it's going to be a case of, right, go to bed, not champion, wake up the next morning, hey, you're champion, well done. So it obviously must kind of take away from it a little bit, I would imagine, just for the fighter. But that's what they're going to do. You know, it's actually crazy when you think about it that the WBO are going to strip Charlo because obviously he's not fulfilling his mandatory obligations. He's moving up 2 weight class to face Canelo. Likelihood is he's ever going to come back down. So they're just making hay while the sun shines. They're letting him be announced as champion and then he's going to be stripped. Fair enough. His brother has held the WBC title for 2 and a bit years. Well, he's obviously held it longer than that, but for 2 and a bit years, he's not defending it. And he's got no fights lined up. And yet, not a hint from the WBC. It's all G. It's A-OK. Absolute joke. It really is. Like, that really is. Like, the WBO and the IBF are not perfect. Certainly not. I mean, WBO have made some questionable decisions, as have the IBF. You know, they haven't called it. Alright, Boots Ennis is mandatory for Terence Crawford, but they haven't done a mandatory in 5 years. Right, that's how long it's been. So they are not perfect, but goddamn, at least if they say they're going to do something, they go and flip and do it. At least if a fighter is not fulfilling his mandatory obligations or is not fighting, they'll say, right, title please, we'll make you champion in recess at a push, but if you're not going to fight back, we're just going to strip you. The WBC don't give a damn. They really don't. And you know, I maintain that. So, you know, Conor Benn, Eubank Jr. was talking about him, but I maintain the reason why they stripped Conor Benn from the rankings, didn't strip him, but they took him out of the rankings, had nothing to do with the failed tests or anything like that. Obviously, that was over a couple of weeks ago. It was just because they were feeling pressure. And it's like, you know, most people probably wouldn't notice a contender, you know, a guy ranked number 13, you know, going out with the rankings or something like that. So they wanted to show that, oh no, we can remove anyone for inactivity except our champions. You know, and, you know, I do wonder if that had been in a different division or a different kind of fighter, what would they have done? Because it's a joke, really. It really is. Like, could you imagine Beterbiev deciding, I'm going to spend 2 years out of the ring? They'd have stripped him like that. Terence Crawford has declared that he does want to fight Jamel Charlo in his next fight following his win over Errol Spence. He acknowledged that a rematch with Spence may have to come first in the month of December. So it may be that we're going to get the Errol Spence rematch in December. And following on from the video I done the other day, and obviously there was a call to BDA, that was where all this came from a urologist who was saying that it's his opinion and his assessment that Spence is suffering from some form of residual neurological issue at the end of the day, right? That is his opinion. That's what he said from what he's seen of Errol Spence over the last couple of years. It doesn't necessarily mean it's true, but it is some food for thought. You know, it is something to think about and it is something to look into. And, you know, as I said in that video, with regards to this whole situation with Errol Spence, I hope the best for him. I really do. Do I want to see him fight Crawford again? Not particularly. When a fight is that one-sided, it does take away from the rematch. It doesn't make you compelled to want to watch it. It doesn't make you, look forward to it as much as the first fight, because, it's different if it's been a toe-to-toe war, if it's a real nip and tuck, closely run thing, and one guy's just nicked it, and you're like, right, let's see it again. When it's as one-sided as that, you really just stop and you think, well, what more can that guy do? And furthermore, that guy is taking an absolute beating. So how is he going to be in the rematch? Probably not much better, if not worse. And with Spence, a beating like that, everything else in his career, I think that it is best he just decides to go in another direction. I know obviously there's that pride in him, and he's definitely got heart, can't question that. And obviously he's a very prideful man. He wants to avenge that, but I just don't think it's a good idea. I really don't, for Errol Spence. So that is the situation there. Now, this is an interesting one. So I don't know if I talked about this already this week, but I'll talk about it briefly here. So Chris Eubank Jr. has officially parted ways with Roy Jones. I'm not necessarily surprised he's parted ways with Roy Jones. He's been with Roy Jones now for about 3 years, roughly, and haven't been impressed really with what I've seen. Eubank certainly appeared to respect Roy Jones a lot more than he had previous trainers, and I always said, I reckon that's to do with the fact that Roy Jones has been there, seen it and done it. He was a tremendous fighter, all-time great fighter, amazing, and Eubank looked at Roy Jones and thought, right, that's someone who knows what he's talking about. That's always how I felt it was with Roy Jones. But Roy Jones is a fighter, tremendous. But as a trainer, was very unproven. He'd worked with people like Isaac Chilemba in the past, and he hadn't changed any of their fortunes or anything like that. At the end of the day, Chilemba is what he is. You were never really going to turn him into a world-level fighter. But Roy Jones as a trainer was very unproven. With Eubank, you could see Eubank was trying to mimic some of the movement of Roy Jones. Roy Jones was trying to get the box a little bit more and, use his jab more. With Eubank, I kind of always felt like he was stuck between styles. There was times in the ring where he seemed to want to go back to type, which at the time may have actually been a good idea in some of those fights, but he was so fixated with what Roy Jones was teaching him that I felt like at times he was kind of missing a step at times. Sometimes it was good, sometimes it wasn't. Against Liam Williams, you saw a lot of improvements there, but against Liam Smith, he had his most success in that fight where he was doing what he used to do, which was look to land the uppercut up above the guard. Liam Smith squaring the shoulders, coming in with the high guard. Eubank was able to find the uppercut. Obviously, it was a defensive mistake that caused him to get stopped. And, going into this rematch, you were kind of thinking, right, if he can tighten the holes in his defense, then he's got a chance, because stylistically Liam Smith should be a fighter that Eubank, gobbles up, because he likes those types of fighters. He's not with Roy Jones. It's announced here that he is going to be trained by Bomac moving forward. Now, a lot of people are saying, well, that's a very, very good move. Bomac is a good trainer. Terence Crawford is his, star student. I would say that, look, Bomac is good a trainer as he is. There's only so much you can do with someone like Eubank Jr. Certainly at this point where he's in his mid-30s. He's in his mid-30s. The athleticism that he relied on a lot in his 20s is waning, it's fair to say. And with Eubank following on from that knockout defeat, how much does he really have left? I suspect probably not a great deal. And, I am not someone who advocates changing trainer in the run to a big fight. Sometimes familiarity is better in the run to a big fight. Different if you know you're going to be in a big fight maybe 10 months in advance. Give you a good bit of time to incorporate yourself with that trainer. That's fine. But a quick turnaround, probably best to do an ain't broke, don't fix a job and see how you get on after the fight. But with Bomac, going into Eubank's team now so soon, coming into the rematch, any kind of effect that Bomac could have on Eubank, you're not going to see. You just won't see it. It's too short of a turnaround. When Andy Lee fought Derek Chisora, when Joseph Parker fought Derek Chisora the first time, he had just started training with Andy Lee. He'd only started training with him, I think, about 6 weeks prior. So there was no real time to really ingratiate yourself into how Andy Lee does things and see how it is and see what you feel and what Andy Lee is teaching you for you to pick up. You literally saw no improvement whatsoever in Joseph Parker in the first fight. In the second fight, he had a lot more time to spend with Andy Lee, and you did see him look better in the rematch. Certainly did. He won it more convincingly. So you need a good bit of time. I would say probably every fighter is different. You know, if you look at Tyson Fury didn't need long at all to you know, get familiar with Sugar Hill and, you know, really get an idea of what was going on there. But not every fighter is going to be like Tyson Fury. You know, some fighters take a long time to really get used to a trainer. So if Bomac has any impact on Chris Eubank for the positive, it won't be seen straight away. Certainly not. Certainly not. I also seen an announcement that Chantel Cameron will rematch Katie Taylor. That's going to be on November 25th. It's going to be at the Tree Arena again. There was a good few fights announced this week, actually. So Tree Arena, Katie Taylor versus Chantel Cameron 2. I suspect Chantel Cameron will win it again. I thought she'd win the fight going in the first time, and she did, although they did try their best. One judge had it a draw, bizarrely. You know, that card couldn't have gone any worse for the Irish fighters. You know, people always say to me, you're not very patriotic. You don't pick the Irish fighters. And it's like, yeah, because if I don't think a fighter is going to win, I ain't going to pick them. And if I don't think a fighter is very good, regardless of where they are, where they're from, their background, their ethnicity, etc., if I don't think a fighter is particularly good, and I think they're going to lose, I ain't going to pick them based upon where they're from. You know, that's always something that I never understood. People be like, well, you know, why don't you get behind the Irish fighters? Because they're not good. That's why. What's there to get behind? They're not going to do anything. And that card, every Irish fighter who fought someone who fought back lost. It was a bad night for them. I don't know how this is going to go. I've heard rumours that Gary Cully is going to rematch the guy who knocked him. I can't think of his name now. And that's going to be interesting because Gary Cully is with a new trainer. For those who don't know, Gary Cully is now with Joe McNally, which I think is a good move. You know, he's out. Not that Pete Taylor is a good coach, but I think you can only took Gary Cully as far as he'll take him. So Joe McNally is going to be interesting to see what he does with Gary Cully. In terms of some of the other fighters, I mean, I really don't know. The rest of the fighters who were on that card, Paddy Donovan was the only one who has any real talent. The rest are all, you know. I had hopes for Gary Cully, but that loss, that's going to take some coming back from. Apart from him and Paddy Donovan, the rest are absolutely garbage. They really are. They're not going to do anything. So let's see what they do with this Katie Taylor rematch with Chantel Cameron, how it goes. It's going to be interesting. Joshua Buatsi versus Dan Aziz, that's been officially announced for October the 21st in the O2 Arena. I believe there was a fight announced for the undercard. Hang on a second, I'll see, because I'm nearly sure there was an undercard fight announced for it, but I can't remember who it actually was. And I'll see if I can find it here on BoxRec, on Dan Aziz's BoxRec. Because, Lawler versus Mikael Lawler, I think is how you say that, versus Chamberlain. What card? That was meant to be on, I think that was meant to be on Joshua Buatsi's debut with Boxer. I think that was meant to be on his card. Chamberlain, I think, just ended up fighting just a journeyman. They're going to have this fight for the British title, I think it is, on this card now. Yeah, it is for the British title. On the undercard of Buatsi versus Dan Aziz, which is a very, very good fight. I'm looking forward to that one. Obviously, it's a eliminator, so the winner will get a crack at Dimitri Bivol. Let's see how it goes. You know, I have a lot of respect for Dan Aziz. I think that he's come up the hard way. He's picked up everything at domestic level. You know, English, area, Commonwealth, British, European. He's done it the traditional route, and he's done it well. He's won those fights well. But out of the two, the more talented is Joshua Buatsi, and I think anyone with an eye for boxing can see that Joshua Buatsi is the more talented of the two. He should win. But just because a fighter should win, they are the more talented, doesn't necessarily mean they will. You know, so Buatsi has looked a bit. I haven't really been impressed with a Buatsi performance for a couple of years now. Whereas Dan Aziz, every time I see him, I'm more impressed with him. So it's an interesting fight, certainly. I also think Skye need these types of fights. I mean, I remember when Ben Shalom took over with Skye, and I said, right, let's give him a little bit of time, all right? Because, you know, they're taking over after Eddie Hearn was there, not really known as a promoter. So I kind of said, give him a little bit of time. The shows will be a bit dead at the start, and we'll see. Well, it's nearly 2 years, and I've not really seen much of an improvement on the Skye shows, so he needs fights like this, and he needs to have better fillers on the undercard, truth be told, because it's one thing to put on a good main event, but like, you look at some of Frank Warren undercards, you look at some of Eddie Hearn undercards over the past few years, you think back to some of the fights that have been on them and you're like, oh, that was memorable and that card was pretty good. They're so forgettable, these boxer cards. I mean, like, you know, Lawrence Okolie when he fought Chris Billman Smith, I mean, who fought on the undercard? They're just so forgettable, these undercards, you know. So looking forward to that fight, as I said, happening in October. Let's see how it goes. Actually, in terms of Dimitri Bivol, you know, he's not got an opponent lined up, and Callum Smith is no longer fighting. Well, as it stands, the Beterbiev fight is going to get pushed back. But if you're Eddie Hearn, would you not just roll the dice on on Bivol versus Smith? Because Beterbiev, God knows what's going to happen to him. I mean, really, God knows what's going to happen to him, and they're never going to get that undisputed fight over the line anyway, because of, you know, obviously boxing politics and stuff like that. Nothing to do with the promoters now, it's the sanctioning bodies. Would you not just try and do Smith versus Bivol then, if that's the case? We'll wait and see. Alexander Usyk was on TNT Sport today. His thoughts, I should say, on comparing Joshua and Dubois. And he says, you cannot compare these two guys. They are completely different levels of athletes. The only thing they have in common is they are both boxers. You know, for me, I always found it very strange to, like, I even still, like, you know, when you see fans who, they would know the sport of boxing. I wouldn't go as far as saying they're casuals per se, but they'd be kind of meh, they dip in and out. And they'd always be like, oh, Joshua's a Frank Bruno type. It's like, no, he's not. Dubois is more Bruno type than Joshua is, and the two of them, I would say Dubois is probably the stronger of the two in terms of physical strength, because Dubois is naturally a big, heavy set guy. Joshua obviously lifts a lot of weights. They're both powerful. Could argue Dubois maybe has a bit more punching power. Joshua seems the more athletic of the two. Dubois is very slow, very stiff, as is Joshua, but I think Dubois is slower. So they are very different. In terms of Alexander Usyk versus Daniel Dubois, obviously that fight is coming up at the end of the month. I can't see how Daniel Dubois wins that fight. I really can't see how he wins that fight. You know, the one thing I would say about Dubois is he may, and I say this, he may go for it more than Joshua did. I know he's quitting the fight, but I think he may be, if he's getting outboxed, if he's not really taking punishment, he may be more inclined to just say, the hell with it, let's just see what happens. That's the one saving grace I would say for Daniel Dubois that I think may very well happen. Again, I say may, I'm not saying that that's a given, a steadfast given that he will. I'm just trying to find where this is. Oh yeah, here it is. Excuse me. Derek Chisora, and this is a very late announcement, so I wonder what kind of shape both fighters are going to be in. But Derek Chisora will face Gerald Washington. This is going to be on the undercard of Joshua versus White, which is obviously happening next weekend in the O2 in London. Chisora's been out of the ring since he took that beating at the hands of Tyson Fury last December. The fight should never have happened, but AO. And Gerald Washington, I mean, when's the last time he fought? I know he lost. I can't remember who he lost to now. It's been that while ago. Gerald Washington, when's the last time he fought? Now, Washington is no great shakes as a fighter. You know, he has a couple of good... Okay, so he lost his last two fights. He lost to Charles Martin in 2020, and he lost to Ali Darimzi. I think that's how you say that. Lost to him in 8 rounds. This is the guy who beat Adam Kalnacki, beat Kevin Johnson, lost to F.A. Jag by over 10 way back in 2019. He lose that fight back. He lost most of the rounds in that fight. So, yeah, Washington not been on a great ray of form. I would you look at that fight and you say it's interesting from a styles point of view because Washington is a more talented boxer, a bit athletic, or at least he was. Chisora is just come forward pressure, or at least he was. Washington never liked those types of fighters. He always struggled. He always actually fell apart really way by the scene with those types of fighters. Washington has seen better days as a Chisora, so you might actually see a good little scrap. I'd say the fact that this is probably a short announcement job for one of, if not both of them, probably leads me to believe that we'll see some swing and a miss from both guys quite a bit, and might be entertaining. Might very well be entertaining. You never know. In terms of Spence Crawford, it reported that did quite a good generate. It actually done over 21 million from ticket sales, so it done a very good gate. It's just behind Gervonta Davis versus Ryan Garcia. So it's actually beaten some fighters or some fights that you would have thought would have done better. So I always assumed this fight would do decent. I knew it was never going to be. Look, I knew it was never going to be a Mayweather Pacquiao type of fight in terms of pay-per-view buy rates and stuff like that. But it's definitely done some good numbers, which obviously I'm very, very happy to see that. You know, I'm really happy because I always was like, this fight is going to be good. I knew this fight was going to be good. Bit not lackluster. No, Jesus, it wasn't lackluster. But in terms of the competitiveness of it, it wasn't what we wanted, but it was still a decent fight nonetheless. So I'm glad to see that done some good numbers to recoup some of the money anyway. In terms of fights that have been announced this week as well, we got a lot of announcements of fights this week. We obviously got the Taylor fight announced. We obviously had the Dan Aziz fight, Dan Aziz Joshua Buatsi fight being announced. We've also got Josh Warrington versus Lee Wood. That's been announced for October the 7th in Sheffield. So it's going to be on neutral ground, still in the north of England. Leeds and Nottingham coming together in Sheffield to watch this fight. My thoughts on it are, it's two thoughts really. One is, I think it's actually not a bad fight. You know, in the grand scheme of things, it's not a bad fight. You have Lee Wood, who is the big puncher. You know, we can box a bit. You have Josh Warrington to come forward, throws a lot of punches, tries to wear you down with volume. Should he be getting a world title fight, given the fact that he lost his previous fight and he's not had a win since? I think he should have had at least one win, to be honest with you. And I think that in some of the sanctioned bodies, that is a rule. Obviously, with the WBA, it's not, because they've allowed this fight to happen. I understand why they're doing it. You know, it's obviously a big fight, certainly for those two contingents of fans, and they'll definitely pack out Sheffield, and it'll be fun to see. It'll be fun to see, you know, both fans cheering each other on and going, because these are both primarily football fans. You know, they wanted to do this fight in the City Ground. Josh Warrington has done Ellen Road, so you know it was definitely going to be. They're definitely going to be bringing a lot of football fans to it. So I reckon the atmosphere is going to be immense. I reckon whoever wins, you know, I remember saying when Lopez fought Warrington, I think that was in the Leeds Arena, is what it was called. There was like, you got to have problems because England lost in the World Cup that day. I was like, you're going to have some peeved off fans. Seriously peeved off fans. So it'll be interesting to see. I hope the fans don't go misbehaving during the fight or anything like that. We get some riots or something like that, God knows. But in terms of the fight, I think the fight's going to be pretty good. You know, it'll be interesting to see what happens on the undercard. You know, we're still waiting to hear what is going to happen with Conor Benn and the situation there. But I wouldn't be at all shocked if Conor Benn features on the undercard if he's allowed to compete, because he's provisionally not suspended by UCAD. So if they can fight in October, it wouldn't shock me if he appears on one of those undercards, to be honest with you. In terms of next week, I obviously talked about Derek Chisora taking on Gerald Washington. And, you know, for me, I love heavyweight fights. As many of you will know on here, I like heavyweights. It's always been a division that's just perked my interest. And the Joshua versus White card next week, the rematch, it's not looking to be a bad card. It's looking to be a decent enough card, you know. There's Campbell Hatton versus this guy Tom Ensel. I don't rate Campbell Hatton, as many of you will know. That's why I've not really been reviewing any of his fights lately, because I only really tend to review fighters who are in very, very entertaining competitive fights, or I rate them. Don't really rate Campbell Hatton too highly. Johnny Fisher is fighting Harry Armstrong. Sorry, Harry Armstrong. I always say Henry Armstrong when I see it, because you just see that name and you just think Henry Armstrong. No, not fighting Henry Armstrong. Great fighter Henry Armstrong was. Fighting Harry Armstrong, Johnny Fisher. This is over 10 rounds. I don't know. This could be his first scheduled 10-rounder. In fact, it is actually. It's his first scheduled 10-rounder. He's only been the distance once, but this is a step up for Johnny Fisher. It's for the Southern Area title as well. I'm not really sold on Johnny Fisher. You know, he definitely needs a lot of work. I don't know how high his ceiling is. It might not be particularly high. As I said, I've not been jaw dropped what I've seen from Johnny Fisher as far, but he is a addition to the heavyweight division nonetheless. Derek Chisora, obviously on top of him, Gerald Washington. Hrgovic versus Dempsey McCain. That's going to be one to keep an eye on. Hrgovic co-main event, hasn't fought. Now it's going to be interesting to see. When's the last time McCain fought? He fought October last year. It was a 3-rounder. He was quite inactive last year. Only had 2 fights. Now, Hrgovic hasn't fought since he fought Zhilei Zhang on the undercard of Joshua versus Usyk 2. And that win, some dispute the win. Some dispute it, and you could say rightly so. But that win has aged a lot better given the fact that Zhilei Zhang went over and absolutely obliterated Joe Joyce. Obviously, they're having their rematch in September. So the win has aged well. It's going to be interesting to see how he handles Dempsey McCain. I've not really rated Dempsey McCain too highly. But saying that, you could look at someone who hasn't looked amazing, i.e. Zhilei Zhang didn't look phenomenal in some of his fights, and he went in there against Filip Hrgovic, and many people believe he won, and he obviously beat Joe Joyce. So you write people off at your peril at heavyweight, and you do wonder, Hrgovic hadn't been looking amazing, it has to be said, as of late. I know going into the Zhilei Zhang fight, he was struggling a bit because obviously he lost his father. I think he lost his father in the run up to that fight, so obviously his head was not really going to be fully with it. But he hadn't been looking great even in the fights against lower level opponents. So for me, it was a case of, okay, it could be a variety of things. Now he's been out of the ring a year because he was active going into the fight against Zhilei Zhang. He's been inactive. How is that going to affect Filip Hrgovic? So a lot of questions to be answered in that fight against Dempsey McCain. So let's have a look. See, I don't really rate McCain too highly, but saying that, he could prove me completely wrong. So let's see. And obviously the main event, we've got Joshua versus White. I'm going to be doing a lot more videos on that. I'm going to cover that a bit more in depth over the coming days. I'm going to work on that over the weekend as well. Some videos on that fight because, as I said with the Boatsi Dan Aziz fight, realistically Joshua should win that fight. And to be honest with you, he should win it pretty comfortably. I really do think Joshua should win that fight very comfortably. But it's not like it's a complete mismatch, if you know what I mean. Dillian Whyte has things that he can do. You look at the first fight that they had, and that was Dillian Whyte, who was out of shape, had an injury, was following Jonathan Banks around the world, so not getting full camps. And he was able to have success. People look at the second round in that fight and say that's the only bit of success Dillian Whyte had in that fight. No, it wasn't. You actually go and watch the fight through. He had a lot more success in the fight, especially if you look at the third round, for example, as well. It's around Dillian Whyte won. He had success doing other things, and I'll talk about that a bit more in depth over the weekend. There's some videos that I'm going to be doing on the two, so stay tuned for that. In terms of everything else, I think that's pretty much all the news that's been around to cover in the world of boxing, so I'll leave it there. Hope you enjoyed the video, people. Smash the like button if you could. Hit subscribe, of course, if you haven't already. Plenty more content coming over the course of the weekend. As I said, a bit more in depth on Dillian Whyte versus Anthony Joshua 2. I have to talk a bit more about Errol Spence as well, which we will get to. Might even make a start on it this evening, who knows. But for now, I'll leave you with that. I hope you enjoyed the video, people. Smash the like button if you could. Hit subscribe, of course, if you haven't already. We are coasting so far through the 12k. We're nearly at 12,100. Only about 30 or so off that. So 12 onto 13, onto 14, and hopefully 15 by the end of the year. That is the dream. That is the goal. Let's give it a go and let's see what we can do. For now, I'll leave you with that. Smash the like button on the way in or on the way out. For now, I'll talk to you peeps. Peace.